I'm William Shatner. I've done a lot of things in my career, but this takes the cake. This is so cool. You, Joseph, today, it's all about you. You won the internet. Congratulations. It's exciting. It makes me want to celebrate. Makes me want to get up out of this chair. Makes me want to sing. Makes me want to dance. Makes me want to shout. Kick my heels up. Throw my hands up. Toss my head back. No, really, people should be shouting your name in the street.
Come on now, sing
that song.
Joseph,
Sing it out loud.
Joseph.
I want to celebrate. Put it up in lights.
The internet belongs to you.
See, no one else deserves to be celebrated like you because you are the best.
Joseph Jaffe. That's I believe that's a Japanese name. And but I tell you what, he's not famous. He's famouser than he was, or used to was. But fame is fleeting, like a paperweight. It just comes and goes.
Am I being overconfident? Am I becoming complacent about complacency?
I think you are.
Oh, he's not the Messiah. He's just a very naughty boy.
Yeah, I've got big ears.
I just want to see anyone else. Piss off.
That's the one. Because you literally complete me, and we complete each other.
You've obviously encountered discrimination in your own life by virtue of being Australian. So
Hey, Manuel Kemp was a real pissant who was very rarely stable.
I don't want to get too gushy, but I might just be saying you complete me, Dean. P&G now stands for Pritchard and Good.
Branding is not a bad blind date. Look at you! You are insane!
How did I do that?
You're
How
insane!
did I do that?
You're insane!
Well, guten Tag. Is that the right? Well, it depends. I mean, it depends where you are in the world. It is a very special episode of Joseph Jaffe is Not Famous because I have the world famous, the Wall Street Journal best-selling author, Alex Brueckmann. Brookman. I was going to say Brookman. All the way, not from Düsseldorf, but from Canada. So he took a wrong turn. But then again, so did I. I'm a South African living in the Northeast, where, depending on where you are in the world and what day it is, because these episodes are somewhat evergreen, it is in fact snowing outside. So, you know, close your eyes and imagine it is white out and it is peaceful. And in the world of strategy and organizational dynamics, in organizational design, it's not peaceful. It's volatile. It's unstable. Purpose. Who are we? Why do we exist? Simon Sinek is rolling in his grave, and he's still alive. We're going to get to the bottom of it. We're going to talk about identity coming up shortly. Now, as I've been doing at the beginning of this year, 2024, is really talking about my why statement. Who am I? Who am I? I'm Jean Valjean, 24601. Is it 24601? I think that's his number. As a teacher, facilitator, and coach, I help high aspiring entrepreneurs, owners, and their leadership teams get unstuck, return to growth, and become forever changed. What does that mean? Well, when it comes to stuck, I started this talk show when people were stuck at home or stuck in general in March of 2020. And so my purpose is to help you get unstuck. And if you want to continue this journey with me, please subscribe to the show, bit.ly/subscribe to the show. What does it mean to return to growth? Well, as a coach now, I help leadership teams and business owners get unstuck and return to growth. But growth doesn't always mean market share and profitability and top and bottom line and diagonal lines. Sometimes it can also be growing up, growing out, maturation, and the ability to prioritize. And what about forever change? Well, that's the name of my new book, How a Global Pandemic Changed My Direction, My Purpose, and my life. And you can find out more at foreverchanged.life. So that's how I tell my story. And every day, I'm fortunate enough, I don't even know what word that was, but it just rolled off the tongue, didn't it? This is what happens when you day drink. Just kidding. But every morning, Monday through Friday, 8 to 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, I am in the Collective Cafe doing a little bit of virtual coffee, audio first, audio only, experiences and journeys into being able to push ourselves further. One of them recently was the whole conversation about psychological safety. And maybe that's how I found Alex, who knows a thing or two about the concept of psychological safety. I also did recently an entire session on Elmo, who just said, hey, just checking in. How's everything going? And apparently the worldwide response on X to Elmo was, not good, Elmo, not good at all. I'm sorry for asking. We're also doing two, not one, but two live reads at the moment, The 4 Obsessions of an Extraordinary Executive and Crucial Conversations. And if you want to actually come and hang out with us, you can do it in our Discord, discord.gg/Alpha Collective, or you can even subscribe to a podcast version, and you can do that at bit.ly/Collective Cafe to Go, where you can actually, while you're getting the kids ready for school on the treadmill, walking the dog, or just commuting to the big bad city, you have an opportunity to hang out and feed your mind while you feed your body. Bob Farnham is here, and he said, I've been meaning to ask you about StreamYard. Well, you just did. StreamYard is pretty amazing. Good to see you, Mr. Bob Farnham. Well, Bob, you know, because you've been a regular here for the last few years, that it's time for the seated soliloquy. And the seated soliloquy is always connected to my guest. Today, it is called ID, please. I'm going to need to see some identification. Identity. Who are you? Who are we? Who am I? As I said, I'm apparently not Jean Valjean 24601. I actually asked Rob Dubé, who just wrote a book called Shine with Gino Wickman. I said, who are you, Rob? And he said, I am everything and I am nothing. I am both living and dying at the same time. Hey, Alex, who's sitting in the green room, stuffing his face right now with green M&Ms, which was in the writer in the contract. Who are you, Alex? Do you know who you are? Have you discovered who you are yet? Are you becoming yourself? Are you forever changing? Are you continuously changing? Do we ever really know who we are? Do we ever really find out? Is that essentially the beauty, I should say, of the journey of life, that we are continuously becoming, we are continuously moving and transforming and morphing and evolving? But forget about the individual, about companies. Who are companies? Who are they at the end of the day? These lifeless, faceless, inanimate objects, these containers, these organizational dynamic. What is a company? Who is a company? Does a company mean anything? Is a company just really an amalgamation of all the human beings inside? Can you actually answer that question without really getting into core values and culture and understanding what their purpose is? Why do they exist? What is a company's why? Why do so many companies struggle to be able to understand who they are? To look in the mirror, the proverbial mirror, or the glass, and be able to really see themselves as they are, as they could be, and become something better, a better version of themselves. Why are so many companies struggling? Why do they choose the vanilla route? Why do they choose just to be like everyone else? Daring to actually fit in as opposed to stand out, to stick out, to stand for something during these tough, turbulent, and confusing times. Hey, listen, what do I know? I'm just the host of a talk show. Let's ask the expert and see what he thinks. Alex Brueckmann is the Wall Street Journal bestselling author of The Strategy Legacy and Secrets of Next Level Entrepreneurs and Creating the Strategy Legacy. He's a strategy facilitator for executive teams of high growth startups and Fortune 500 executive teams. As a keynote speaker, Alex brings actionable insights to audiences around the world, ranging from strategy and leadership to executive development. Alex, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Joseph.
And on that basis, what the hell am I even talking about? Mumbling and bumbling my way through this idea of identity. We will get to that soon. But it is, and I can't wait to really pick your brain on this, because for a couple of reasons. One is, even with your background and your experience, from startups to high growth startups to Fortune 500 companies, there's definitely a life cycle and a continuum. And so it will be great to be able to place and retrace and figure out where these moments of truth are, where bridges help organizations cross chasms, and unfortunately, when they fall into the void that is created by broken bridges. Being very eloquent and
Philosophic
poetic.
almost.
But almost. Thank God. Not exactly. Alex, we have two choices today. We can start with ridiculous or sublime. Which one would you like?
Let's do ridiculous first.
Let's do ridiculous. He wants to play two truths and a lie. Let's play two truths and a lie and get to know the man behind the myth, or the myth behind the man. Now, Alex, we were chatting in the green room, and it turns out that, yes, I might be twisting and turning in search of reality, but we're going to introduce two truths and one lie. But as it turns out, and you cannot let in which one, the lie actually has truth in it. So this is going to be very, very tough. Are you ready to play?
Yes, I am.
All right. Well, at the top of the list, apparently, you founded an exclusive annual strategy retreat for CEOs and entrepreneurs set in the Arctic, utilizing the serene and challenging environment to foster breakthrough thinking and resilience. Tell us about this retreat and what is so special about the cold.
Well, it's not necessarily the cold, it's the lights that have always been intriguing for me. It was one of the big bucket list items that I always had, was to see the aurora borealis, the northern lights. And it is both humbling, because you stand there as a human being and you look up in the sky and it's just this this incredibly huge natural setting that makes you feel how tiny you are in comparison to what's happening above you at this moment. So I find that being humble is super important to being able to create something of significance and to create something valuable, not taking yourself too serious, but always asking yourself, what is the value that I bring? What can I learn? How can I develop? And the setting just gives it something special.
I absolutely love that. And whether this is true or a lie, there is definitely so much there to discuss. This concept of creating strategy, vision, a roadmap, being able to plot a path forward, and yet remaining grounded. And it's interesting, right? Because you have this juxtaposition of the BHAG, the big, hairy, audacious goal, being able to think big, dream, dare to dream, and yet still staying grounded, maybe in the reality of the here and now. It's not often you hear the word humility associated with the word strategy. And I guess that comes out in the cold, doesn't it?
Well, you could say that, unless you sit inside in a warm glass dome, so you enjoy the warmth of your favorite drink maybe, and at the same time have the opportunity to look at the northern lights.
Well, that is true, but one thing you don't want to be doing is you don't want to be sitting in a serene and a quiet environment, because it turns out you're a metal fan, but you also think that Taylor Swift is awesome, because I'm assuming GF stands for your girlfriend makes you. So let's talk about the juxtaposition between Taylor Swift and being a metal fan. I thought that was one chasm that could not be crossed.
Oh, well, it can. When at the end of last year, I got, like everyone else, I received my Spotify Wrapped, and in my top 5, there was actually a Taylor Swift song, and I was like, how is that even possible? And well, it's just there is great music in almost every genre. And even as a metal fan, I have to admire the genius of a person like Taylor Swift, based on the breadth of her, already now at early 30, the breadth of her incredible musical legacy, ranging from country to dance. And it's just inspiring to see how a woman or a person can build something that is so huge. She's still on the Eras tour at the moment as we speak, and it is already the biggest grossing musical tour of all times. And it's just amazing to see her genius and her flexibility and the interests that she has in all kinds of artistry, which then flies back into her music and creates something new. I personally can't wait for her new record that she just announced at the Grammys. So it's something that is interesting when you are a metalhead and spend half of your life in dark caves and clubs, and then at the same time you admire like America's sweetheart.
I've got to tell you, and this is probably demonstrating a certain dementedness to me, and a sadistic side to me that I shouldn't be admitting. But part of me wants to see a Taylor Swift versus Beyonce cage death match. 2 go in, only 1 emerges. I'd like to see that. I'd like to know which one wins. Who would win
It would
between
probably become
Beyonce
best
and Taylor
friends.
Swift? 2 go
They
in,
would
1
probably
goes out.
become
Who are you
best
putting your
friends.
money on?
I think
I'm
I would
holding
put my
you to
money on
this.
Beyonce.
Yeah,
I would
so
put
I'm
my
I'm
money
gonna
on
go
Beyonce.
Taylor Swift. So if that ever happens, front row seats. So I'm gonna take a little bit of a leap here, and the reason why I actually started this idea of fun facts and 2 truths and a lie is because you can learn so much about a person, and you can learn a little bit about their personality as well. And the irony is that you can always bring it back to the subject at hand, business. So here's my question based on what you said. Taylor Swift truly has demonstrated agility, versatility, and the ability to cross over from country to pop. And she's even been able to convince and convert a metalhead to her popular music. Let's talk a little bit about brands becoming versatile and adaptable and crossing over into new markets, and being able to move into new areas, juxtaposed against, of course, the tyranny of line extension and the loss of focus. Somewhere in there, I'd love to hear your thoughts on how a brand should be thinking about moving into new areas and yet not losing sight of their core focus and their reason for being.
Taking Taylor as an example, I think what we see very successfully being showcased is that what carries her success are her incredibly deep relationships with the Swifties around the world, her fans. And this is nothing that just came about. She's been in the music industry since her teenage years. So it is something that has been built over a very, very long time. There is an incredible level of trust, an incredible level of involvement at play when you talk to Swift fans, and when you see what they kind of put on their own shoulders and go out of their way to fly across the world and see a concert somewhere else, maybe in Europe, because you couldn't get tickets for a show in the US. So the level of commitment that we see, the level of connection between, when you want to talk between the brand and the users, is very, very deep and has been built over time. And it is the brands that have this level of respect and trust in their audiences that are then able to do weird things and to expand into areas where other brands, if they tried the same, would terribly fail because they do not have this trust capital in their bank accounts, if you know what I mean.
I absolutely do. And you know, I was thinking, not to put you on the spot, but I'm going to put you on the spot, and I will help you out a little bit as well. I was thinking, which brands have that hallowed trust, the commitment, the connection, the ability to transverse or transcend and bring audience and fans with them. So I'll go first. Actually, I won't go first because I'll give you. Do you want to take a stab at who has done a good job of doing that, and maybe who hasn't done a good job? I'm putting myself on the spot. I have an idea of one that I'll mention if you're stuck while you're thinking, but I have a feeling you'll know immediately.
I can go business or I can person. Let me do both. If we go business, one of the companies that has built this trust capital for a very long time is definitely Apple. They have a godlike appearance for many when it comes to the products that they've been producing. I myself have been an Apple guy through and through since the late 1990s, and there's just no way I would ever do anything else unless you force me to. And Apple has managed to go from computers into mobile phones, into accessories, and if you take and obviously into services, if you take a look at iTunes, and have created an ecosystem that is, first of all, closed in itself and works perfectly fine in itself, but it has this incredible spillover effect into literally everything they touch. If we talk about person, then I would go for Elon Musk. Even though I do not agree with necessarily everything the guy says, I find him highly controversial. He has created some sort of fandom that is comparable to Taylor Swift. There are people that would buy a Tesla just because Elon Musk is the owner of the company. There are people that all of a sudden are interested in space travel just because Elon Musk does it. There are people championing Neuralink just because it's Elon Musk who is behind it. So the genius of one person, if you want to call it that way, has built that trust and credibility that almost everything the guy touches becomes gold. I haven't even mentioned the Boring Company, and God knows where he's always also invested in, and not to mention X.
I love that. I love that example. I was actually, funnily enough, what I do is I find a couple of quotes, one quote normally for my guest. And this is not the quote, but I saw this quote in searching for quotes on brand identity and organizational identity. This was the quote, funnily enough, that came up. Brand is just a perception, and perception will match reality over time. That's an Elon Musk quote. And there's elements of manipulation in there, and there's elements of saying, if I believe it, and if I say it long enough, I think of Donald Trump. I think of the ability of saying that at the end of the day, that perception can actually become reality if ultimately it is followed and practiced consistently. So it's definitely a kind of a lateral quote, wouldn't you say? I mean, this idea of, because we say in marketing, perception is reality, don't we?
This is a perfect quote because it's exactly what he did with Dogecoin. When you take a look at how he hyped up Dogecoin and how I don't want to know how much money he made with investing in Dogecoin and then hyping it up. So I think it's interesting because it's not his company, or Dogecoin as a concept is not his concept. It's a digital currency. And he was able, because of the trust that people have in him, to create incredible value for himself by investing, hyping it up, and selling again. That's what I assume he did.
Now, I'll tell you, I wasn't going to leave you hanging, but the example I was going to use from a company was Apple as well. So great minds think alike. And actually, the reason I mentioned Apple was with the Vision Pro goggles, which I still think people walking around with these, cords hanging out of their ear, they look ridiculous. In fact, I try to come up with a term. Google had the concept of, with Google Glass holes or glass holes, and so I came up with a concept that I'm calling eye mole. IMOLE, because it's almost like people are like moles. They're going into their own world. They're burrowing into the world and distancing or separating themselves from reality. But the reality is these Vision Pro goggles at $4,000 a piece sold out like this. And these are people that trust, and I read another point, Alex, that said, recognize that these are going to be the worst of all the Vision Pro goggles in the history of the world. And people are just saying, I'm in. I'm going to line up around the block. That's trust.
It is 100%. There are a few brands that could pull off something like that.
All right, so it shows you how we go from sublime to ridiculous back to sublime. But there's one third element. And by the way, if you think you figured out which one is the lie, you just have to go to bit.ly/2T1L_ Alex Brueckmann, and you will be able to, it's not live, well, it will be live by the time you watch this. And Alex, I guess people could win. Can we tell them? You could win front row seats to the celebrity death match between Taylor Swift and Beyonce. How awesome is that going to be?
Is celebrity deathmatch still a thing? I haven't watched MTV in 100 years.
Well, it is now. So here's what we know about this man. We know that he likes to see lights or see the light, but we know that he likes to still be warm indoors. What else do we know about him? Well, we know that he likes to be warm indoors when he watches Taylor Swift, but sometimes he likes to go outdoors. And apparently he designed his own motorcycle and asked Harley Davidson to build it based on a brand new bike. Almost no part was left untouched. Tell us about your custom Harley Davidson built motorbike.
A lifelong dream that I never had the time and money for to build unless the pandemic came, because all of a sudden I did have time. And because I, had worked a little bit in my life and saved a little bit of money, I was like, okay, let's do this now. And I asked Harley Davidson to take a Slim, the model Slim, and rip it apart and rebuild it based on how I like the look and feel of a motorcycle. So in the end, they changed almost everything on the bike. And we got parts brought in from Europe, which we couldn't find here. So they actually said they never built a bike like that at Harley Davidson Vancouver. And I really enjoy the bike. However, last year I didn't even have the time to ride it, but I promised myself that this year will be the year I bring it back out of the garage.
Well, assuming that is even the truth, which we will never know, this has been Two Truths and a Lie. By the way, Glenn is watching, and he said Travis Kelce would protect Taylor Swift. So, but Jay-Z would protect Beyonce. So,
I would bet that Jay-Z's friends are more notorious than Travis Kelce's posse. So my bet stands with Beyonce.
So there you go, and you can use BetMGM after the Super Bowl in 2024 to decide who's going to win this. But enough about the ridiculous. Let's get to the sublime. Let's talk strategy. We're going to get to the book in a moment, but I am absolutely intrigued by this entire conversation about organizational identity. And so I looked up the definition, and the definition is as follows, Alex. It's a field of study in organizational theory that seeks the answer to the question, who are we as an organization? It's just such a big question and such a, almost like a woo-woo question. But here's my question. How many companies can actually answer this? Who are we as an organization?
I do not have data to back any claim up with data when you ask me of how many companies can actually claim that they know who they are. But what I can tell you is none of the companies who bring me in as their executive coach or a facilitator for the board have a clear answer on that. And those companies range from automotive OEMs to banks. And you would think that large organizations often do have a good answer to the question, who are we as a business? They do have an idea of who they might be able to become, but it's relatively rare to find an organization that has a very good understanding of who they are at this given point in time. They do often have a clear answer on several aspects of their organizational identity, but they very rarely have I ever met an organization that has completely nailed down every aspect of who they are.
So let's take it a step back for a second, because it is often and widely held that things like core values or even purpose, these are not invented, they are discovered or uncovered. They're there, maybe they were there all along. What are your thoughts on whether identity, in fact, is discovered and uncovered versus invented or created?
I think yes, and we need to be aware that several aspects of identity need to be uncovered. For example, and I truly believe that your strategy is being designed, it's being created, your business strategy. That is nothing that you uncover. Also, your values are nothing that are there. The values that are there are just there, you know. Those aren't necessarily the ones that you want to have at the core of your being. So and that the topic of values leads into the topic of behaviors. How do we want to treat each other? And that is something that needs to be defined by an organization. That just doesn't happen. I have worked with organizations that have that pride themselves for their culture. And they do admit at the same time that it is purely accidental, that they have never put effort in to define values or behavioral guidelines. It came about as the result of a team of founders being very deliberate about certain things. And when you do that, you create a certain expectation of the people that you hire to mirror these types of behaviors and values. But unless you write them down, you will lose them relatively quickly when you scale. So when you bring in more and more and more people, your culture will dilute unless you are really deliberate. And that is the moment when you go from by default to by design. And you teach people who come into the business, who take leadership positions, on how they can promote the type of culture, the type of values, the type of behaviors that you want to see in the business. And these topics, they often sound very fluff, but they aren't. They are the environment that you create in which you bring your strategy to life. They are incredibly powerful if you do it right. And they are deep. We are human beings. First of all, we're social beings. And if we talk about maybe the next layer down, we talk about, are we rational beings that can have emotions, or are we emotional beings that can also rationalize? And I believe that it's the second. We are, first of all, social beings, human beings, emotional beings that have the ability to rationalize. So if you take that into consideration, it helps you understand the importance of designing your culture and of leading your culture into the business across all leadership levels, so that everyone in the business understands what their contribution is to culture, how they can live up to values, both emotional values and, let's say, more rational values. And I give you an example. When we talk about emotional values, we talk about which type of language, which type of terminology do we use in our interactions, and should we use in our interactions. And when we talk about more the rational part, it's about things like being true to, let's say, the law, right? Being a law-abiding citizen as an organization, for example. That's rational. It's not emotional language.
You know, it's funny because I was thinking of Patrick Lencioni's value trap. The value trap model with accidental, aspirational, and then permission to play. And the example that we use for myself as a coach with small and medium-sized businesses is the fact that one of Enron's core values was integrity. And so how do you find...
Which is already, sorry for interrupting you, Joseph, this is in itself a joke already, because integrity is not a value. Integrity is what we call a moral value. It is... In Lencioni's terminology, it would be a permission to play value. If you don't have it, you do not have my permission to even be a company and interact with me as a consumer. So if you want to like double check at this point whether your set of values for your business is actually just a set of moral values, I encourage you to check out the work of Roger Steer, a British philosopher, corporate philosopher, who gives us a list of 10 values that he deems moral values. And the funny thing is, almost every organization I've ever looked at, 90% of the values are just moral values. They're basically saying, we're not assholes. You can work with us. That's what they say if they put moral values to the forefront of their culture and identity. It's not a value. It's being a decent human being.
So that's interesting. So your point, just to restate it, because I think it's a very poignant one, because I've seen companies with core values say like no arseholes is a core value. What you're basically saying is a moral value is almost table stakes. A company should do better. If that's what a company has to say in order, and quite frankly, it might actually be culturally a differentiator. If everyone is an arsehole, the ability to not be an arsehole and pride yourself on not being an arsehole may be good enough. But I think you're saying is we can do better. We have to do better.
Let me give an example. If you are a used car dealer, you deal with a level of distrust that might even justify putting a moral value into the center of your culture, because you want to over-index on the fact that you are led by integrity and honesty. Integrity and honesty are moral values. If a company like Disney or any other Fortune 500 company comes around the corner and puts a moral value into the center of who they are, into the center of their culture, then this is just pathetic, because those are the companies that need to do better, that can do more, that can be way more precise and descriptive about what guides their decision making, about what guides their interactions with each other and their customers. And there lies one of the big opportunities to differentiate yourself in that wide sea of Me Too companies that are out there to get you.
I will tell you, it makes me think of, I was just thinking, in a sea of dishonesty, right? It's the used car salespeople saying, we're the least dishonest. And I actually saw this. I have an example where I still have the image somewhere. I was walking down the streets of Manhattan in New York, and this at the time, Singular Wireless, before they were acquired by AT&T. And there was a poster, and the poster said, the network with the fewest dropped calls. And I was like, you're actually selling yourself based on the network that sucks the least. It's like an airline saying we're the most on time, or the least delayed. I was like, come on, we can do better. Alex, let me jump to a slightly different and yet a related topic, which is this idea of, my fifth book is called Built to Suck. A little play on Jim Collins' Built to Last. And it was inspired by Jay Shyatt and others who said, let's see how big before we go bad, before we suck. So there's this idea that with size and scale comes the ability to lose your way, to forget, to end up veering down the wrong path. I would love to hear your thoughts about identity and even just the ability and culture from a strategic standpoint about how what you've encountered in terms of companies that lose their way when they get bigger and therefore go bad, and how a company can actually fight against and resist that urge to suck.
I think there are a few really good examples of companies that really lost their way. One is Boeing. Another one is I don't want to call any other names, maybe a few financial institutions that have been famous for a few not so well thought through moves that caused a lot of trouble both for their customers and for them internally. But let's take a look at Boeing for a moment. Boeing has been a company with great pride in their engineering. And over the past decades, the company has completely reversed their market share in the industry. They lost to they lost to Airbus big time. And when you take a look at scale, it is obviously more difficult to lead a company based on values, based on behavioral guidelines, the bigger you get, because it's way more important to enforce certain behaviors and be true to these behaviors than writing them on a website. So unless organizations understand values and behavioral guidelines as a leadership tool rather than a tick box exercise that a marketing department does with an external marketing agency, and then plaster your website with these elements of your identity, unless leaders take it very, very serious that it's them who are the stewards of a culture, if they don't do that, we see things that happened at Boeing, where quarterly reports and stock price became more important over time than staying true to your values. And it's difficult if you scale a company. It's difficult to stay true to who you are. And sometimes it needs to emerge who you are, but nevertheless, it needs to be something that you are. A company that has done that over decades very, very successfully is Patagonia. This company has and still is a company that is 100% true to who they are, and their actions speak volumes around environmental protection, around how they build new products. One of their core values is do no harm, or do as little harm as possible, because they are aware that being a company needs resources, and taking resources from the earth or nature is in itself something negative. So setting off, and ideally not only setting off but doing more good than harm, is something that you can do at scale, and Patagonia is the best example for that.
So why do companies lose their way? Is it size? What else contributes to a company that either forgets who they are or who they were and ultimately loses their way?
I think we need to take a look at who we are as human beings to answer that question. And what I mean with that is, if you understand where you come from, then it is easier for you to hold true to those values than if you just join in somewhere in the middle of the way. So let's assume you have parents and grandparents who give you a very good sense of your family history. In my example, being German, my grandfather fought in the Second World War. So that gives you an idea of what your family went through. That gives you an idea of why you are part of a family that thinks a certain way, part of a family that celebrates a certain way, part of a family that has certain unwritten rules about how they interact with each other. If someone else, for example, my son, is born into that family, that he grows up having that culture, having that experience, exploring through living the culture. If you now translate this concept into an organizational setting, there is just no way that you have 2 decades of growing up in an organization before you take ownership. That happens relatively seldom. That someone who becomes the CEO or a C-suite executive of an organization has a 20-year track record in an organization. It does happen from time to time, but it's definitely not the usual. It's not default. And now imagine you do that at scale. You bring in people from other companies basically on a daily basis. You imagine you're a large company. Every day you hire people into certain roles. Sometimes it's individual contributors, and sometimes it's on leadership levels. And these people bring history. These people bring their own experience. And then you put them on a table and tell them, you need to be stewards of your culture. And then you take into consideration how often these topics play a certain role in executive conversations. And you realize they don't. They do not to the degree that they should. And it is hard, it's almost impossible to be stewards of a culture when there's permanently new influx into that culture with different experiences, different backgrounds, etc. That would be like having a family where every day a new child is born and brought into this organization. And the child grows up into the company. But imagine, and this is like, it's very analog to the example. Imagine you have 10 teenage daughters, just for the sake of the numbers. And then all of a sudden, those teenage daughters come around the corner with 10 boyfriends. Those 10 boyfriends or girlfriends or whatever they want are people that are outside of that organization. They grew up outside of that company, right? So their background is different than your background. They bring their experiences from their families. And there is just no way you can keep your family the way it was before, because there is this influx, the experience, and the way of doing things a certain way that those 10 different individuals from 10 different families bring. And if you translate that back into a corporate context, you immediately realize where I'm going. You cannot just define your culture once and then be like, and that's it. You need to take care of culture permanently. You need to see it evolve. You need to sometimes put hard guardrails in place where you see that certain behaviors are not in line with who you want to be as an organization anymore. But that requires top management attention, and not only top management, that requires an understanding throughout the organization, from the top management to the individual contributor, that certain things are who we are, and this is how we show them.
Well, listen, 10 teenage girls bringing home 10 teenage boys as boyfriends. I mean, that's pretty scary. I'm struggling to even just get beyond that. You said a bunch. You said a bunch of things, and I actually just want to go back to one to make sure that I heard and understood correctly. First of all, I think you're talking about an inevitability of change. You're talking about a dynamism and an evolution of culture. You're talking about the fact that at the end of the day, a company is just the sum total of the human beings that are inside the company, and new people are always going to come into the company as opposed to legacy. But you also spoke very personally. You said, I think you said your grandfather fought in World War II. So I assume that meant he fought for Germany in World War II.
Yes, he was made to fight a battle, as a 14-year-old that he didn't even understand.
So how has that changed and informed you and ultimately your kids? Because you mentioned it, and I was like, I think what you're saying is this is who I am, or not who you are, but this is where you've come from. So you've had to reconcile, you've had to adapt, and the fact that you mention it freely, is to me different to most people who might not volunteer that. I found that to be quite, let's call it shockingly refreshing. And there's an honesty there. I wonder if you're comfortable to talk a little bit of, not so much the specifics, but I found that to be just very different and very, truthfully, very honest.
I have no problem sharing that, because it is the reason I don't live in Germany anymore. It is the reason we took a conscious decision, my girlfriend and I, to raise our child in a different culture. Canada has lost many lives in wars, but none of these wars was fought on Canadian soil. So there was no massive generational trauma as it was, as you would have seen it in many, many European countries over so many decades and even centuries. So if you ever visit Germany, there is no escaping the history of this country, the history of the Nazis and the history of the people who lived at that time. So my grandfather passed away about 10 years ago, age 85. And it is inevitable that when he had kids and when he had to deal with the trauma that he saw and the cruelties of the war, that there were things that he couldn't talk about. And there was no widespread psychological support system for the people who came home as from being prisoners of war. And these people were left alone and thrown back into the society. And you need to imagine the scale at which this happened. It took years and years for people to return from camps of prisoners of war, from Russia, from anywhere across Europe. And these people were left alone and had to function again. They had to rebuild this country after World War II. And there was a generation, my parents, that were born in the 50s, so after the war, that had to deal with behaviors of their parents that they couldn't explain, and they didn't even try to understand them. It was just what they grew up with. That's what they knew. And if you go through hell as a teenage boy or a teenage girl during the Second World War, the way you raise your kids is in a certain way. And the way these generations then raise their kids, which means my generation, will be in a certain way. And when you talk to elderly people in Germany, it is very different. The vibe that you get is very different than if you talk to elderly people, for example, in Canada. And I realized this the first time I came to this country, and I visited the family of my girlfriend, who is partly German, partly Canadian. So I had the direct comparison, and I realized that there is so much unrealized generational trauma. People just don't realize how deep it roots and how it informs their decisions, and how it informs how they talk to each other, and how it informs how they raise their children. That one of the best things I could do was to take my 8-week-old son and to move to Canada, to give them the experience of growing up in a country that is free of that type of terror and generational trauma that was inflicted on our grandparents. I think that's as far as I can go.
No, I listen. I mean, I was thinking as you were talking, I was thinking, who would have thought that in a conversation about organizational identity and the strategy legacy, we're talking about trust and honesty and humility and cage death matches between Taylor Swift and Beyonce. But there is something so unbelievably poignant and honest, and I just really appreciate listening to you and hearing from you. Generational trauma, and we see it, when you address it like that, it's easy to understand why companies themselves fall by the wayside, because they're just sweeping everything under the rug and not being able to to address what is essentially open and honest. So I really appreciate that, and I appreciate you. The book is called The Strategy Legacy: How to Future-Proof a Business and Leave Your Mark. And I was immediately attracted to, and what we'll do is we'll let's paint the town strategy legacy red and white and black, and we'll even make you the official sponsor of the episode. If you look top right, you will now see your little logo in the top right. There are two words that are real key here, Alex, or phrases. One is the concept of future-proof, and the other one is leave your mark. Let's start off with future-proof first. There are many people that say it is impossible to future-proof. It is not possible. You can future-protect, but you cannot future-proof. What are your thoughts about the concept of future-proofing?
People who say you cannot future-proof a business have a point. We need to accept that. But if you create a book and a book title that sticks, it needs to be very clear on your message. So obviously I could have said future protect, but who needs that, right? What we want is...
that does not roll off the tongue, does it?
Exactly. So the reason I say future-proof is I think it is the only way to get very close to future-proofing. And actually, we saw a lot of organizations during the COVID-19 pandemic that have not done the necessary work before the pandemic hit. And those who did survived the pandemic. So in a way, they did future-proof their business. And what I mean with that is creating an organization that is so foundationally strong that if it gets hit by something like a pandemic or an economic downturn, that it is able to react accordingly. That is the only thing that you need to be aware of as a leader. You don't need to have the answer. You don't need to know everything. But what you do have to be aware of is that there will be a next crisis. There always will. We live in an age of constant crisis. My entire adult life has been one economic or health crisis after the next. True. I mean, it started in the late 90s with the dot-com bubble burst, and it has never ended since. So being aware of that, building an identity that helps you understand who you are, what you stand for, And especially when we talk about business strategy is the choices that you make to win in your marketplace. And if you don't do that, if you don't do choices, if you're just a me too, and you're one of the lemmings that does exactly what everyone else does, then you will experience the pain that everyone else will. But if you create clarity in where you invest your resources in, chances are that the distinction that you build will create additional customer value. And that value will, in the end, be captured by you in the form of profit, in the form of margins. And that will create enough, let's say, buffer for you that if the next crisis or when the next crisis hits you, the body blow doesn't go straight to the bone. There is some buffer there that helps you to pivot. You buy yourself time to save your organization. And I think that is what comes very close to future proofing.
I really love that final point, the idea of buying yourself time. You keep yourself in the game. You see, I would have said it a lot less eloquently. I would have just said, when the hits the fan, you see, I have my own protections here. But seriously, when it hits the fan, you know, what do you stand for? What will you fall for? Will you fall? Will you be able to stand tall? Will you be able to get, you know, what do they say? Lose the battle, win the war, stay in the game, and be able to keep moving on. So now let's talk about the last part, this idea of leaving your mark, legacy. I want to know, first of all, I'm going to start off with you, Alex. What do you want to be remembered for? What's your legacy?
I don't want to be remembered. I want to have the right to be forgotten, to be honest. But that is not the point. The point is, I don't see legacy as a permanent thing. I see legacy as what I give to the next generation in terms of non-tangible assets. So for my children, this is the education, the way of thinking that I can give them. For the company that I built, it is making that company strong enough that it can survive without me. I don't know whether I get hit by a bus tomorrow, but if I do get hit by a bus tomorrow, I want my company to survive. And if I'm a leader, that is exactly what I do. I make myself obsolete. I make myself not being needed. I make myself forgettable, if you know what I mean. So that's how I think about legacy. The best legacy that you can create is not the statue that they built for you on town square. The best legacy as a leader that you can build is to enable those who come after you to function without you.
As Tom Peters on my show said, a leader's job is to create more leaders. And here is the quote that I actually did find for you, which is perfect time to introduce it. The purpose of an organization is to enable common men to do uncommon things. Now, we'll get beyond the fact that today we'd say common people, but this was Peter Drucker who knew a thing or two about strategy. The purpose of an organization is not to create statues, but to create something that is enduring. You know, my first boss actually said that the fast food chicken company that I worked for said that Nando's enabled ordinary people to realize extraordinary aspirations. How do you interpret this quote, or how do you react to this quote?
Well, if you understand the time in which Drucker lived, those types of quotes are understandable. If you hadn't said it was Drucker, I would have associated it most likely with Winston Churchill, just because it is written the way it is written. And in that time, those grandiose ideas really mattered, because the people who phrased them were some of the first ones to really write them down, or to really stand for those types of decisions that they made, and stand for those types of quotes. Uncommon things are, like, if I understand the term uncommon things, I need to ask myself, what is uncommon? And there is not a lot of uncommon things nowadays. At least that's what I truly see when I look around. There is always someone who has done something similar before you these days and age. But to be honest, uncommon can be very, very normal. You know, if you look around, how many people suffer from mental health issues because of how they've been treated in the workplace? Just treating people properly can be uncommon. in this day and age. And if we are aware of the impact that we have by showing up properly, yeah, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, and by the way, unfortunately, honesty and integrity these days is not that common.
That is
I
true.
think this is a great way to wrap up today, because I think if people go back and they watch the show and listen to this really carefully, you have a beautiful red thread that goes back to this idea of humble beginnings, never forget where you've come from, but also this ability and willingness to adapt, to evolve, and to accept the inevitability of change and evolution. And I love how you even spoke about the essence of future proofing is the ability to just give you the ability to stay in the game and keep on figuring things out. Absolutely loved the conversation. The book, of course, which you have to go out and buy immediately, is called The Strategy Legacy. It is a Wall Street Journal bestseller, but also tell us a little bit about the field guide to creating your strategy legacy.
Well, there are people that I truly admire for how they shared their knowledge with the world. One of them is Marshall Goldsmith. Another one is Patrick Lencioni. And Patrick Lencioni, like 2 decades ago, wrote a book called The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. And he then later created a field guide, sharing not only the concept, but also the way how you can overcome the 5 dysfunctions. While I did something similar, I'm not comparing myself to Lencioni. I'm far away from that level of fame. It is about the same idea. In the strategy legacy, I share the why and the what. And in creating the strategy legacy, I literally give away the checklists, questionnaires, facilitation, specifications, everything that you need to create a legacy in your organization, built on a strong business strategy, but reaching out in those softer spots around culture and identity, so that you can do it in your business as a leader, or you bring someone in who can help you facilitate the process. So this is for me the moment of being humble enough to realize that I might have created something of value, but if I don't share it with people, it will always stay, below the radar. So that's the reason I put those 2 books out.
Well, I'll tell you, Alex Brueckmann, you are creating a legacy, whether you want to or not, whether you like it or not. They will not create a statue of you. As you say, you want to earn the right to be forgotten. But one person that will not be forgotten, and they no doubt will build a statue of, is Chuck Norris.
You are Chuck Norris approved.
And we will be back soon. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching the show about hope, positivity, optimism, and if there's time left over, a little bit of marketing with your host, multiple author, and global keynote speaker, Joseph Jaffe. If you like the show, tell a friend or two. Please subscribe to the show, and if you want to get inside news, previews of upcoming guests, and much more, visit josephjaffe.com/subscribe to sign up for the show's newsletter.
And despite the best ministrations of your wife, you still look ugly.